Reading some of the stories on here reminded me of something that happened during my holiday this past Christmas. I went on a family holiday with my dad, my mom, and my brother to Tasmania, which is kind of like a big island to the south of Australia. I wasn't terribly interested in the trip, but I wanted to spend time with my family, so I left all the bookings to my dad, and I will never do that again. He has his own Airbnb he manages, so I thought he would be able to find decent places to stay on his own. When we walked up to the Airbnb my dad booked, the first thought I had was, if I wanted to sell drugs, I would do it here. My mom wasn't impressed at all, and was already telling my dad off for booking it. I didn't say anything. Maybe the inside is nicer. It was a dingy little house. The paint was peeling, roof was rusty, and there were plants overgrown to the side of the building. There were 3 entrances. The first one, I worked out, was the entrance for the host. It looked okay, not as bad as our entrance, a little bit tidier. It went downstairs, so we figured out after a while the host most likely lived below us. The second looked like it was the main entrance to the house, but it was sealed shut. The door looked like it would break down if anyone was even to push on it slightly, and was obviously unused. The third was ours. Aside from the overgrown plants, it was fairly normal. From the looks of it, we figured out later that it looks like the host had divided up the house somehow. She lives below. We live upstairs, but there was one half of the house upstairs that wasn't accounted for. It's hard to explain, but the space we occupied only accounted for half the house, and it only went up to the main entrance I spoke of, which is in the middle of the house. We checked in, just grabbed the keys, because the host never contacted us at this point. All was well on the inside. It looked a little old, but wasn't creepy from the get-go. I did notice some odd things. I only mentioned this to my dad. There were a bunch of antique instruments displayed at the entrance, and right on top of one of the piano were 3 things that looked like urns. Now to explain, I am of Chinese descent. These urns freaked me the fuck out. Some people think they're for displaying, but we used to store dead people's ashes, so I really didn't like them being there. I told my dad and he didn't like it either, but he went up and tapped the urn to see if there was anything in it. My dad mentioned that the one he tapped was definitely used for ashes. It had scripts on it for safe passage to the heavens, from what I could make out. After I stopped freaking out, I went and picked up first dibs on the biggest room, as per usual, but then noticed there were heaps of mirrors around the room. Again, another thing, not sure if it's a Chinese thing, but we don't like sleeping with mirrors facing us when we're in bed if we can help it. So, I went to move one of them, which was smack bang in front of the bed. It was leaning against a door, and when I took the mirror away, the door actually opened a little. That freaked me out even more. I got my dad and we decided it was better if I slept with my mom in another room. He would take this room with my brother. Again, my dad, being dad, opened the door a little and shouted, "Hello?" Before I told him to shut up. I had a peek inside but couldn't make out much, only that it was dusty and seemed to be part of the other half of the house. My dad soon after put a chair and his suitcase on top of it, in front of the door to keep it shut. Fast forward to that night. Everyone was sleepy and went ahead to bed. I stayed up a little because I had some emails from work to catch up on, and went to work in the living room area. At one point in the night around 11:30 p.m., I remember there were a few thumps on the roof. Sounded like someone's footsteps, then followed by the loudest and most horrendous noise. Sounded like a train was on top of me. It was screeching like steel on steel, and it lasted almost 30 seconds. I literally froze at that point, didn't know what to do. Thought my dad would come up and check on me, but no one ever did. I didn't say anything the next morning because I thought I may have imagined it out of being overly tired. The following night, same thing again, except I was in bed this time, Just got into it, so not asleep yet. It was around the same time that the exact same noise started up again. My mom woke up but was frozen like me. Dad came to check on us. We were all just frozen there listening to this noise, wondering what the hell it was. After it stopped, we freaked out but managed to shrug it off and went to sleep. Before I fell asleep, I remember hearing some faint thumps that stopped shortly after it started. The next morning, we kind of had a meeting of some sorts to discuss this. This is when I told them about the night before. We were extremely unsettled at this point, and luckily it was checkout day. We just got the hell out of there. We never found out what it was. The creepiest thing was, after we packed up and were well on our way from the place, Dad was driving, but he still looked completely disturbed. I asked him if he was okay. He said, I am now, but I did not have a good night's sleep last night. I pressed on and asked him if it was the noise. He said nope, that didn't bother him much compared to another thing he experienced. What bothered him most was when we left our tour on the second day. He still had his suitcase on top of the chair blocking the door in his room. He just showered, so he also left the towel on the chair to hang. He said when we came back, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. The chair had moved slightly and the towel was on the floor, as if someone tried to push it from the other side, but unsuccessfully after they noticed there was a lot of stuff on the other end. I forced him to ask the host about the noise in the door. She replied that the door was the door to her art room, and that the noise was just a possum on the roof. I don't believe her. The noise was not something an animal or even a human can make. Airbnb host, I hope we do not meet, ever. Story number 2. This one is from a couple of years ago, and it's a short one. It was almost Christmas and I was doing last-minute shopping at the Tuesday morning by my house. I should also note it was late in the evening. The sun was setting. As I was walking back to my car, this older man was standing next to his van, which was parked next to my car. He looked like Santa without all the beard. He began approaching me and said, "Hey there, beautiful day we're having today. Would you like to see the puppy in my van?" I immediately avoided him and walked straight to my car. Having heard no puppy barking or anything of the sort just made it all that more alarming. I could hear him saying, "Oh, so you're not going to say anything?" as I was shutting my door. I should have locked the doors as soon as I got in, because within those few seconds I saw him walking around the back of my car in my rearview mirror and to the driver's side of the car. It freaked me out so bad I fired up my car and sped off. I was shaking by the time I got home. Story number 3. I stay in a remote area. I guess some would say I live in the country. We have 2 neighbors that stay right next to us, and there's a house across the street. We just moved in and we're still doing renovations, so we're holding out on putting up blinds or curtains until we paint. At night, sometimes I'll wake up and walk into the kitchen and hear little knocking sounds. I try to play it off as me just hearing things, but it seems it may be something more. Tonight, my boyfriend and I were having our usual Friday night pizza, a few beers, junk food, and movies for the kids. We had all the windows open, seeing how it was getting warmer already in North Carolina. After a few beers and pizza, my boyfriend announces that he is sleepy, wants to take a shower and go to sleep. As he goes to the shower, I continue to sit at the table right next to the open window, browse on my phone. I decide I want one more beer before going to sleep, so I set my phone down, and as I'm getting up I hear a noise outside the window, so I turn to look. Someone is crouched down and runs off. I stand at the window petrified for a moment before going to get my boyfriend. He goes outside looking for whoever it was and shot off a warning shot to let them know he's armed. He came back in without finding anyone and feeling just as paranoid as I was. Story number 4. This happened about 5 years ago now. I had just gone through a rough breakup of a codependent relationship, so I was going through a phase of trying to be more independent, self-sufficient, and just generally more okay with being alone. I would go out to a lot of movies and restaurants by myself. At the time, I was living in Montana, where spending time outdoors is prime recreation. Camping solo seemed like it would be a good exercise in truly being self-reliant, so I packed a little tent and went to Jerry Johnson Hot Springs. Jerry Johnson is a natural hot springs with a few small, mostly natural pools in the mountains on the border of Montana and Idaho. I'm trying to keep this as brief as possible, so I won't go on explaining the place. What I will say is that it's truly in the middle of nowhere. From the interstate, it's about a 1/3 mile hike across a bridge and into the woods. From the interstate, it's about a 45-minute drive in either direction before you reach any kind of civilization in the form of a gas station. There isn't a motel or anything attached to the hot springs like there are with some. It's just forest land with a few tiny ponds of warm water, and if you ever go, you'll probably be the only person there. There's plenty of daylight, so I decided I'll go soak first and then set up my camp when I'm finished. I make the short hike to find there is a couple, man and woman about 30-ish in the main pool, and they look very startled at the sight of me. I say a friendly hello from a distance as I approach. At first they don't respond and just stare. Then the guy pipes up, "What are you doing, man?" I tell him that I'm confused. The man then asks, "Is that you that's been creeping around the woods watching us the last hour?" I assured them that I didn't know what they were talking about. They began to tell me that there was someone in the woods, way off of the trail. Apparently they've been yelling at him, and he just doesn't respond. He'll walk away into the woods for a while and reappear somewhere else, just watching. After they'd been assured that it wasn't me, I get undressed and get into the water. Their pupils are huge. They probably ate some magic mushrooms. I never asked, but it just seems very obvious. It's not a big deal. It's basically the perfect setting for it. But it makes me think they might just be having a bad trip. We talk for a while, first about the creepy guy, and then about some other stuff. The mood lightens and they seem relieved not to be alone. I'm a relatively large guy, and I guess there is strength in numbers. No more sightings of the creepy man. They get out before me. I'm in the pool by myself for about 10 minutes before I hear shouting in the woods. I decided to cut my soak short just in case someone was in trouble. I get out, dry off quickly, get dressed, still mostly wet when I hear another shout. I start quickly hiking. I eventually come across a couple shouting off into the woods, saying things like, "We have a gun," which they didn't. I ask what's going on, and they say the guy was just ominously standing in the path, looking at them way off in the distance. When they started to shout at him, he left the path and again retreated into the woods. Now he was out of sight. Through all of this, they never got a good look at him. We walk back to our cars. We decide that we'll camp near each other. There's an official campground, but you have to pay. The guy tells me he knows another spot that's relatively flat that would work. I agree and follow them. It's not very far. They set up their tent and I set up mine about 100 yards away. I wanted to give them plenty of space to trip or whatever, and I was out there in the first place to camp alone. We were in dry season on a raw forest floor, so neither of us made a campfire. I got all set up and just sat around reading a book and enjoying nature. The mosquitoes made me retreat into my tent at about 6 p.m., and by 9 I was asleep. At about midnight, I was awoken by the sound of screaming. I grabbed my flashlight and .22 pistol, put on my shoes but didn't tie them, and started running towards the other tent. When I arrived, the two were standing outside of the tent with their own flashlights, completely losing it. They said that the guy had been there, and that we all needed to get the hell out of there now. They showed me a slice in the wall of their tent that he had made with a knife. They haphazardly packed their stuff in a hurry. We walked back to the cars. I only then realized that I hadn't grabbed any of my stuff. I asked if they would go back with me to get it, and they basically said, "Sorry, dude, you're on your own." They got in their car and left. I thought about it for a minute. I could come back the next day and get my stuff, but it was over an hour drive in each direction, and I was there now. I did have a gun, but if I shot someone in the woods, even in self-defense, that would be the beginning of another nightmare that could last the rest of my life. I decided I would go back for my stuff. I killed my flashlight and basically went stealth ninja mode back into the trees surrounding the clearing where my tent was. My thought was that if I was really quiet, then I could hear him, but he couldn't hear me. It took me 20 minutes to get to where my tent was, since I was moving so slowly. When I got back to my tent, it was untouched. I quickly threw on my backpack, put my flashlight in my mouth, grabbed my tent in its fully assembled state with my sleeping bag still inside, and ran back to the car with a loaded .22 revolver. I got back to my car, started it, and drove away. What didn't really occur to me until later is that I never actually saw this guy, and to this day I can't be sure there was actually someone in the woods. I kind of doubt that these people would have sliced their own tent, but at the same time I kind of doubt that there was actually just a dude hanging out in the wilderness all day and night just to freak these campers out. It's possible that the two campers were just messing with me, but if so, they deserve Oscars for their acting performances, as they seemed genuinely terrified. The following story is true. I was in Mexico on vacation over the summer with my siblings. We stayed at my grandmother's house for the entirety of the stay. At this time, I was simping over a girl at my school, and the previous school year was the worst year of my life. I got into a massive depression for the whole year because of my obsession over her. I decided to go on vacation to get my mind off of this girl. I received a friend request on Facebook from an older woman, who we'll call Laura. I accepted the request immediately. A few weeks passed and my birthday was coming up in July. On the day of my birthday, they made my sister and me a birthday party, since our birthdays are only 6 days apart. As day became evening and evening became night, everybody left back to their homes. It was around 10 p.m. when we began messaging each other on Messenger. Previously, I had liked some of her photos and began to message her. She replied and everything was normal at first. This night the conversation began normal. That was until she began to turn the conversation sexual. She then video called me and told me to accept her incoming call. I had always never trusted anything having to do with webcams or recordings on social media up until this time, but being desperate for having something with a girl at this time, I gave in thinking maybe, just maybe I could have something with this woman. I accepted her call and she was there showing herself naked. She told me to turn the camera around on myself. I stupidly showed my face in the video upon her request, and the call went on for about 5 minutes. She then sends me a link saying she screen recorded me during the whole call. She messaged me saying that I must always be available for her whenever she wanted, to not unfriend her, or else she would send the video to everyone I know. I immediately blocked her before she had a chance to do anything else, and removed all of my personal information I had on my profile, as well as most of the pictures I had uploaded until that time, including my profile picture and cover photo. I was scared out of my mind that night and I couldn't sleep until about 3 a.m. So many thoughts were flooding my mind. What if she does send that video to my family and friends? What if she posts a video online? I won't even know. The most haunting thought I had was, what if she sends somebody to where I was to harm me? I was literally nervous the whole time until I fell asleep later that night. I started thinking that even if I had to wait 20 years to find somebody to be with, I would much rather wait to be safe and sound than do something like this ever again. After a couple of days, I unblocked Laura to see she still had her account. It disappeared from Facebook and I never dared check it again. I never trusted webcams before this. Now after this I trust webcams much less. I am so glad nothing happened, and I'm still here alive, safe and sound, thankfully. To all of you hearing this story, I highly advise you, if you want to be with somebody, do it in real life. Never try to find somebody online who you don't know in real life. Also, never ever video call somebody unless you know that person well enough and trust them, and even then be extremely careful who you video call. Story number 2. I have some stories that are more bizarre than scary, but they are bizarre enough to be creepy. They happened to my boyfriend, who we will call Mike, who worked as a security guard for 10 years. The first 3 stories are about strange animal behaviors and interactions. The last stories are about an incredibly creepy workplace and an alarm that went off at a station near Skinwalker Ranch. I obviously cannot say where he worked, but let's pretend it's a utility company with satellite stations all over the western region and remote places. His office was full of dozens of monitors. It was a CCTV station. Mike's job was to report and log all alarms that were triggered in a region that covered 3 states. Most of his day was spent figuring out why an alarm was triggered, and it was tedious considering even the wind would trigger these alarms. Often the alarms were triggered by cats. If in the city, and if it was a station miles away from any activity, then it was likely bunnies or deer. The first story actually took place at home when Mike was on his way to work. I still don't understand how or why this happened. It wasn't some scary cryptid. It was only a large dog. This is what was so unnerving. At 7 a.m. on his way to work, he encountered a dog sitting in the front driver's seat of our car. The door was slightly ajar and there were no other people around. Nevertheless, there was the large dog facing forward in the front seat of the steering wheel. Mike said, "Dog, you have to go." The dog then reluctantly moved to the passenger's side and looked at Mike as if begging him to not make him leave. Mike obviously ushered the reluctant dog out of the car and rushed to work. We still ponder on this and have come to the conclusion there must have been someone who had a dog and was looking through unlocked cars. Then, when he got interrupted, he ran away and in the process left his dog behind. This is the only conclusion we are comfortable to accept. The second situation took place at work on camera. An alarm went off at a distant station far from human habitation. However, the alarm said it was a human that set it off. Mike studied all the videos for what triggered the alarm, and all he could see were deer. The alarm kept being triggered, so he continued to study each camera. He was taken aback on his final appraisal as he saw in the infrared video a man standing casually in the middle of a herd of deer. It makes no sense, but it was on camera. A man standing with the deer without an agitation to them. So was he the deer whisperer? I'm sure some might jump to the conclusion it might be something supernatural, but all the camera saw was a rudimentary man in the middle of a gathering of deer. Regardless, it is no doubt strange and unusual behavior. The final story I'll share with you about bizarre animal behavior also took place far from human habitation at a station in the mountains. Now, this story is so fantastical I actually asked if Mike could show me. I'm sure he broke the rules, but he brought home several stills from the video that he swiftly deleted after I saw them. It's hard not to anthropomorphize what happened because it seems so on the nose. First, an alarm was set off, so he began an investigation into what caused the alarm. He found out it was a mouse. What riveted his attention about this mouse was that it was running back and forth in front of an owl. That's strange, he thought. So he continued to watch, and the owl flew down and stood by the mouse. The mouse kept running back and forth in front of the owl. It's impossible to speculate why the mouse did that, and why the owl didn't eat him. Soon after the owl flew down, a huge porcupine waddled up to the mouse and owl. Weird, Mike thought as he was caught by the unusual narrative. He was able to see all of this because the activity took place near one of the remote but heavily monitored stations, and alarms were repeatedly being triggered by this activity. He noted that they were at a crossroad as well. Soon after the porcupine arrived, a doe and her fawn joined the owl, mouse, and porcupine in a circle at the crossroad. They all stayed there in a circle for quite some time. The temptation to anthropomorphize their meeting is too tempting to not speculate. So it was a meeting. What were they meeting for? I saw the stills of the video and it looked exactly as he described how it happened. The last two creepy stories. Mike took security work on the side to patrol a medical supply factory. This is so deeply upsetting to me, it seems I think about it more often than I'm comfortable with. First off, the building has strange and unconventional architecture, and I feel places like this are damned from the start. There are many creepy things about this place, but I am only going to tell you one of them, the one that stands out most to me. The first time Mike does his rounds, he comes across a wing of the factory that defies all that is rational and safe and mentally sound in this world. During his first and many subsequent rounds he made at this site, he came across a large room divided into cubicles. At first glance, there were many people still at work as he walks in to continue his patrol. However, he almost has a heart attack realizing all these people hard at work in their cubicles were mannequins in wigs, dressed in office attire, and had cubicles that had been personalized with photos and knickknacks. No one warned him. No one had an explanation. This madness took place in the same building where they were manufacturing medical equipment in a highly scientific, highly sterilized, and very professional way. This room is so creepy and so out of place, its very existence haunts me still. Its creep factor was heightened by a lack of explanation and the requirement that security patrol the room. Lastly, I told you Mike monitors CCTVs that cover a region that spans 3 states. Some of the stations are extremely far from civilization, and while I can't name the place, I can say one of the stations that is monitored is near Skinwalker Ranch. One evening he walked into work and his coworker said, "Watch this." Now Mike had been doing this work for years by then, so watching video forwards and backwards became second nature. The video showed an infrared alarm being triggered by an elongated shadow of a man walking, but no man to accompany the shadow. Yes, this is creepy, but his coworker said, "Do you get it? Do you get why it's so creepy?" His coworker played the video again, and Mike realized it was the gait of the walk and the timeline that made the video creepy. When the video played forward as it was recorded, it showed a person awkwardly walking because he was walking backwards in the real-life time capture of the video. The gait or manner of walking only looks normal when you play the video backwards. It is so creepy that it calls into question paranormal activity and time conventions. I personally didn't even consider time conventions when thinking about paranormal activity. I hope you guys enjoyed these true scary stories. Thank you for watching and listening. If you're new to the channel, again, please subscribe now for future content. Email all of your true scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com to have the chance to be featured on an upcoming video. Till we meet again, my friends, stay sinful.